It was supposed to be an ordinary Friday night in the fall of 1982, one of those small-town evenings where everyone seemed to know everyone, and nothing bad ever really happened. But that illusion shattered forever when 17-year-old Kelly Ann Rivers disappeared after taking a babysitting job just 3 blocks from her home in Merrow Creek, Ohio, a quiet community that would never sleep quite the same again. At 6:42 p.m., Kelly told her mother she'd be home by 10. She was babysitting for a new couple who'd just moved into town. They seemed normal, her mother, Linda Rivers, would later say, her voice shaking in an interview years later. I remember Kelly saying their baby had the prettiest blue eyes. Kelly left the house wearing her red windbreaker and jeans, carrying her schoolbooks and a small purse. It was a crisp October evening, the kind where the air smelled like burning leaves and the streets glowed faintly under the amber streetlights. A neighbor saw her walking down Maple Drive, humming to herself. That was the last confirmed sighting of Kelly Ann Rivers alive. When Kelly didn't return home by 10:30, her mother called the Palmer's number but no answer. By midnight, panic had set in. Linda drove to the address Kelly had written down, 214 Briarwood Lane. When she pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. No lights. No car. No sounds. She knocked. No one answered. Finally, she went around to the back door. It was slightly open. Inside the house was empty. No furniture, no pictures, no sign anyone had lived there at all. Just a few footprints in the dust-covered floorboards, and Kelly's red windbreaker arranged neatly over the back of a chair. By dawn, the small town of Merrow Creek had exploded with search parties. Local police combed the nearby woods. Volunteers checked every ditch, every back road, every creek bed. But there was no sign of Kelly. Detectives discovered that no one named Palmer had ever been listed at that address, not in any public record, not in rental documents, nothing. The house had been vacant for nearly 6 months. And then came something even stranger. No one in town remembered seeing the Palmers at all. 2 days later, Linda received a phone call. The line was static-filled, the voice faint, but she swore it was Kelly. "Mom. I'm sorry," the voice whispered. "He said I can't come home yet." Then there was a sound, like someone pulling the phone away, followed by a man's deep voice murmuring something impossible to understand, and the call ended. The number couldn't be traced. The call came from a payphone nearly 40 miles away in a neighboring town called Ash Hollow, a place that back then barely appeared on a map. Weeks passed. Rumors spread fast. Some said Kelly ran away with a boyfriend. Others whispered about a drifter seen near Briarwood Lane. But then police uncovered something chilling. In Kelly's school locker, tucked between her notebooks, was a folded letter, written in a shaky hand. "If anything happens to me, tell them to look in the river." It was unsigned. But at the bottom of the page in faint pencil, was a drawing, a small, almost childlike sketch of a baby's face. In early November, 3 weeks after Kelly vanished, a local fisherman reported finding something strange near the Merrow Creek Bridge, a small, pink baby blanket, soaked and torn against a fallen branch. It had the name Emma stitched into the corner. There was only one problem. No one in Merrow Creek, not a single birth record, not a hospital log showed a baby named Emma. Police sent the blanket for testing, but back then DNA analysis was primitive. It was logged as inconclusive evidence. Still, the story grew darker. A retired postman later told investigators that a few days before Kelly's disappearance, he delivered a single envelope to the vacant house at 214 Briarwood Lane. No return address. Just one word scrawled across the front: Babysitter. Years later, in 1994, a drifter named Thomas Carver was arrested in another county for burglary. During questioning, he mentioned a girl in Ohio who screamed too loud one night. He said he'd been doing construction work in a house with a fake family, a couple who paid cash, never gave their last names, and talked about starting over. When detectives pressed him for details, he got nervous. They said if I ever talked about that night, Carver muttered, I'd end up like her. In the water. He refused to say more. Within 2 days of his release, Thomas Carver vanished. 2 decades after Kelly vanished, the house on Briarwood Lane still stood empty. But in the summer of 2002, a new family moved in. The Dunparks, a young couple with 2 children, began renovating the place. Within a week, they called police. While removing floorboards in the basement, they found a rusted locket wedged between 2 planks. Inside was a photo of Kelly smiling, wearing the same red windbreaker she'd left home in that night. Linda Rivers never moved away. Every year, on October 14th, the night her daughter vanished, she left a single candle on the porch. She was supposed to be home by 10, she still says in interviews, her voice hollow with time. She never missed curfew before that night. In 2017, when the house was finally demolished, police found one final item hidden in the attic insulation, an old Polaroid photograph. It showed a young woman with her hands tied, eyes wide, sitting in what looked like a wooden chair. The picture was blurry, degraded, but the red jacket was unmistakable. In 2021, a retired detective revisiting cold cases came across something that had been overlooked in the original evidence box, an audio cassette labeled only for Linda. No one knows where it came from. When investigators played it, they heard faint breathing, followed by a whisper that made everyone in the room go silent. He said the baby isn't real. And then, a man's voice, low and calm. She knows too much. The tape clicks. A long pause. Then the sound of water rushing, bubbling, drowning out everything else. The tape ends abruptly. In the fall of 2021, nearly 40 years after Kelly and Rivers vanished from Merrow Creek, Ohio, the lot where the old Palmer house once stood was little more than a patch of weeds and concrete fragments. But that changed when a construction crew began laying foundations for a new housing development, and unearthed something no one was prepared for. On September 3, 2021, a crew foreman called local police after uncovering what looked like a rusted metal trunk, buried about 3 feet deep under the area that had once been the basement floor. At first, officers thought it was old junk, until one of them pried open the latch and gagged at the stench that rose from within. Inside were bones, small, delicate, and tangled in a faded pink blanket. The name embroidered in the corner, Emma. For a moment, time seemed to stop in Merrow Creek. After nearly 4 decades of whispers and fear, the town's darkest rumor, the one about the baby that never existed, suddenly didn't feel like folklore anymore. Detective Ellison was called out of retirement. He'd been a rookie when Kelly disappeared in 1982, and he'd never stopped thinking about the case. It was the one that got under my skin, he later said. I remember her mother. I remember that red jacket. Forensic teams sent the bones to a state lab. Preliminary analysis revealed they belonged to an infant female, approximately 6 to 9 months old. But here's the part that stopped everyone cold: the remains were estimated to be at least 20 years old. That meant the baby had died decades before Kelly ever took that babysitting job. So who buried her in that house? And more importantly, why did someone use her name, Emma, to lure Kelly there? Around that same time, the mysterious cassette tape labeled "For Linda" was being reanalyzed by modern forensic audio experts. Back in 2021, sound restoration technology had advanced enough to isolate voices more clearly. What they discovered sent shivers through the investigation team. After filtering out background noise, analysts heard a faint second female voice overlapping Kelly's whisper. It was a childlike voice, maybe 4 or 5 years old, softly singing a lullaby. But then a deeper male voice interrupted, saying just 3 words. "Not again, Kelly." The team concluded that whoever made that recording wasn't just holding Kelly captive, they were reenacting something that had already happened. As the case reopened, detectives began digging into every family that had ever owned or rented 214 Briarwood Lane. Records showed the house had been built in 1948 by a couple named Samuel and Ruth Palmer. The same last name Kelly had given her mother on the night she vanished. According to old census data, the Palmers had one child, a baby girl named Emma, born in 1951. Emma's death certificate listed crib accident as the cause of death. But no hospital record existed, and no burial site was ever documented. And then came another chilling revelation. Ruth Palmer had been a part-time babysitter. Neighbors from the 1950s remembered her as quiet but odd. One elderly resident described seeing her rocking an empty cradle long after her daughter had supposedly died. In 1954, the Palmers abruptly left town. The house sat vacant for decades, changing hands but rarely lived in. And then, in 1982, someone pretending to be the Palmers returned. When detectives showed Linda Rivers an old photo of Ruth Palmer from 1952, her hands began to shake. "She looks like the woman who came to our house," she whispered. "But older. Heavier maybe." She said her name was Mrs. Palmer. Linda insisted that the woman who hired Kelly looked to be in her 40s or 50s, meaning if it was Ruth Palmer, she would have been in her early 60s by 1982. But there was a problem. Ruth Palmer was reported dead in 1979. Or so everyone thought. Her death certificate was never verified and her body was never viewed. Only a signature from a small-town doctor in a neighboring county confirmed the death. Detective Ellison called it a paperwork grave. It was starting to look like someone, possibly Ruth herself, had staged her own death. In the town's public archive, investigators found the original blueprints for 214 Briarwood Lane. They revealed a hidden crawl space beneath the basement, one not listed in any real estate or renovation documents since. When investigators compared those plans with the excavation site, they realized something horrifying. The rusted trunk with the baby's remains had been buried inside that crawl space, then later sealed over with concrete. Meaning whoever did it intended for the house to be rebuilt on top of the secret. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a local antique store owner who contacted police after finding a leather-bound journal tucked inside an old vanity desk sold at auction from the Palmer estate in 1980. The journal belonged to Ruth Palmer. Most entries were mundane, but in the final pages, the tone shifted. "He says we'll get another one. A better one. A babysitter who'll listen this time." And then, the last line, written in fading ink. "When the baby sleeps, the house remembers." After that journal surfaced, retired Detective Ellison and a cold case researcher noticed something else. Between 1978 and 1983, 3 other young women had disappeared from nearby counties, all between the ages of 16 and 19, all working as babysitters. In each case, the family who'd hired them had used false names. And in every case, the babysitting job had been arranged through a classified ad in the local newspaper. Each ad mentioned a child named Emma. Police now believe Kelly's disappearance was part of a pattern spanning decades, connected by someone, or a couple, continuing Ruth and Samuel Palmer's twisted delusion that their lost baby could somehow be replaced. In 2023, while examining aerial footage from the 1980s, investigators made one more startling discovery. Just a few miles outside Merrow Creek, near a cluster of abandoned farmland, they found an old outbuilding with traces of concrete foundation identical to that used in the Briarwood house, same batch, same chemical signature. It appeared to have been poured by the same person or team, decades apart. Beneath the soil near that site, ground-penetrating radar revealed 5 distinct shapes, roughly human-sized. Excavation was scheduled to begin. But then, the night before the dig, someone set fire to the entire site. The blaze was fast, deliberate, and wiped out nearly every trace of evidence. Before his death in 2024, Detective Ellison left a voice note in the case file. His words are quiet, tired, but resolute. "I've listened to that tape over 100 times. There's a point, right before the water sound, when Kelly says something no one ever noticed before. She whispers. She's not the only one. I think the Palmers were just the beginning. Someone else carried it on. And whoever they are, they're still out there. The foundation at Briarwood Lane remains vacant today. The development plans were scrapped after workers refused to continue construction.